I'm John McKee, editor of Messianic Apologetics, messianicapologetics.net. And I would like to welcome you to this episode of Messianic Insider, your theology and news roundup for February the 9th, 2026. Before we get into our theology roundup, we try to do this every Monday. If you haven't, please do visit the Messianic Apologetics website, messianicapologetics.net. Here in the right-hand corner, you see blog notifications. Be automatically notified by email when Messianic Apologetics is updated. You can put your email address there, hit subscribe, and you will be asked to confirm. So whenever we add something new or reintroduce something from our archives, you should get a notification for this. That is different from our email announcement list, which you can subscribe to by clicking on the envelope icon in the upper right-hand corner. That is our email list via Constant Contact. All right, so with that over with, let's get into our theology roundup. And this was announced last week. We're going to be entering into a multi-part series discussing the one law or one Torah issue. This is, without question, one of the most controversial matters we have to deal with as a broad Messianic faith community. The title of our episode today is One Law, Our Internal Controversy. And this is something which I would say has very quickly become one of the biggest areas of dispute in Messianic congregations, synagogues, assemblies, even at large conference level events. And there's not a huge amount of reason, there's not a huge amount of calmness, and many people are affected by their emotions in one way or another, both on the pro side as well as the against side. And that is not good. And, we've got people who have forgotten what the actual issue is concerning one law or one Torah. And we are in the year 2026 now, and this is something we need to see fairly resolved, because there are going to be a lot of things coming in the future where people aren't going to matter if you hold to what they classify as a one law theology or not. What's going to matter is, do you stand by shoulder to shoulder with your Messianic Jewish brothers and sisters and Jewish brothers and sisters in this age of growing anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism as we steadily approach the return of the Messiah? So before we get into some of the specific material I'm going to be reading from on our website, so you all know where our ministry stands before we get into the specific studies over the next several weeks, the one casualty or even fatality in this whole debate, and those on the pro one law or anti one law sides are both guilty of forgetting this. What do the passages in the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of Moses, which use the terminology one law or one statute, actually mean in context? Because there are a lot of people out there who they will simply quote from Exodus 12, 48, and 49 in a meme, and they have totally forgotten what the original context was involving the usage of one law or one statute. And there are other places which use one law or one statute, which similarly have a context concerning a specific area of jurisprudence in ancient Israel. And indeed, whether you like what is commonly called one law or one Torah theology or not, everyone has to have an interpretation of those specific passages and what they meant for ancient Israel and the ancient Near East. And there's a lot of fear to do that. Maybe one law people have overstated things. Maybe some of their critics haven't looked into it enough. When you see a statement, there shall be one law or one statute for the native and the sojourner, is that a statement involving universal Torah? Or is it a statement involving a specific piece of legislation where a sojourner in ancient Israel could have been taken advantage of and a native would not have been? These are some very important and, in fact, very logical questions which don't get enough play in this whole discussion. Passages which stress some kind of one law or one statute, are they emphasizing differences between native and sojourner in ancient Israel, or are they emphasizing commonality? That's the philosophical question, which plays into how you approach these different matters. Is it possible that those who identify as holding to a one law or one Torah theology, is it possible that some of them have not done adequate exegetical or interpretational work? Likewise, is it possible that there are some of their critics on the Messianic Jewish side, different leaders, different rabbis, is it possible that some Messianic Jewish leaders have been afraid of examining specific Bible passages which use the terminology one law or one Torah, evaluating it for what it actually meant within the Torah's jurisprudence? See, there are concerns, there are fears, there are anxieties on all sides. And indeed, I've seen this over many, many years. I've seen people, ramrod certain statements, one law for the native and the sojourner, and they've been cherry picked out of some kind of ancient context. Likewise, I have seen Messianic Jewish leaders at times say, we don't support one law theology, but then they just have fallen flat. Okay, great. What do you think about these passages? How do you interpret them? And they don't want to go there. So the time for having fear, anxiety, should be over. We should be mature adults and able to, if necessary, make some necessary course corrections, make some necessary recalibrations, recognize that these passages affected the jurisprudence of the Torah, while at the same time, and I think this is something which many people don't fully comprehend, none of us, whether we are Messianic Jewish believers, non-Jewish believers, are the original audience to whom the Torah was given. Ancient Israel, and yes, there were outside sojourners who entered into the community who were welcome. None of us are the original people to whom the Torah was originally given. Ancient Israel, various sojourners in the wilderness, at Mount Sinai, entering into the promised land, whatever it is. We're not those people. We are 21st century people having to account for many centuries of post-Second Temple Judaism, Christianity, most probably Protestant Christianity, evangelicalism, and we have witnessed the emergence in the past 50 years or so of the modern Messianic Jewish movement, more than 50 years, more like 60 years now, a generation of Jewish people having come to faith in Israel's Messiah, and many scores of non-Jewish believers whom the Lord has supernaturally directed into the community to co-labor with Jewish believers in the salvation of Israel and the Jewish people. Along with that, because of people being who they are, you've seen different sub-movements spin off of the Messianic Jewish movement, the one law or one Torah movement being one of them. Now, in my estimation, and this is what makes this issue so difficult for me to address sometimes, because, people who followed me over the years know that I think through issues and I reason through matters a lot differently than everyone else. So I don't hesitate to say that I've had disagreements over this matter with those identifying as one law or one Torah, or a number of those on the Messianic Jewish side of the equation as well, particularly those who hold to a hard shell bilateral ecclesiology. Because you got to go to the text and you have to see what the text communicates. You also have to evaluate how we are living in a post-resurrection era with the operative supernatural compulsion of the new covenant. You also have to evaluate, okay, there are great blessings in things like partaking of the seventh-day Sabbath, appointed times, kosher eating, etc. But is that something intended at the present time for all non-Jewish believers? To which I would say no. You have to be supernaturally summoned by the Lord to participate in the Messianic experience, because the main reason the Messianic movement is here is Jewish outreach, Jewish evangelism, Israel solidarity, etc. And while for many non-Jewish believers, and this is our family's testimony, understanding Jesus in the feast was the first real thing that got us pulled in, we do absolutely co-labor with Messianic Jewish believers in the restoration of Israel. We participate in things like Jewish evangelism and outreach, standing against anti-Semitism, standing against anti-Zionism. How much of that do you see in one law, one Torah circles? What makes so much of this difficult to address and evaluate, because there are details which have to be sorted through. The issue of one law, what passages in the Torah mean which use one law or one statute, what they mean is for the Messianic sphere of influence. And I'm sorry to say it this way, what 6 days in Genesis chapter 1 means for a lot of evangelicalism. And of course, what does 6 days in Genesis chapter 1 mean from the text and from observable evidence in the universe? You see a lot of different conclusions drawn. To a lot of people, it means, 6 24-hour days. Other people who take into consideration the vastness of the cosmos might come to a different conclusion, that it's 6 long periods of time. And so much of it involves how little or how much data, how many factors play into how you are reviewing what a passage means. Of course, anybody who has been in theology is aware that early Genesis has spurred on many different interpretations, from young Earth to old Earth to theistic evolution to, it's not even talking about creation. John Walton is well known for promoting the idea of it has to do with the establishment of God's temple in which to dwell. So it's just all poetry, basically. For the Messianic sphere of influence, in a similar way, evaluating what Torah passages, one law, one statute mean is similar. Are you going to look at this simplistically, or are you going to look at this with some other factors in mind? And strong emotions are doubtlessly present. And unfortunately, and I don't often think that some Messianic Jewish believers have expressed things the way they ought. There are many Messianic Jewish believers who are very welcoming of non-Jewish believers coming into their congregations and synagogues. They are very appreciative of them embracing their faith heritage in the scriptures of Israel. They're very appreciative of the blessings that they are partaking of things like the Shabbat or the festivals or what have you. And their Jewish identity is not infringed upon when they see a non-Jewish believer worshiping with them Saturday morning in a Shabbat service. They're secure as Messianic Jewish believers in who they are as Jews, and they recognize that God's doing something very unique Jew and Gentile, one in Messiah, one new man. They often don't adequately communicate that as much as they should. Hence, people who, Messianic Jewish believers who are negative toward that, tend to get more of the attention. So there are plenty of Messianic Jewish believers. They welcome non-Jewish believers participating in outward things of Torah. They don't believe that their Jewish identity is maligned or infringed upon, but they are concerned about, are you genuinely called by the Lord to be with us? And if you are, what contribution are you going to be making to the Messianic mission? Because it's not just about, partaking of things of Torah. It's also participating in, what did we just discuss? That Romans 9, 10, and 11 salvation historical mission. And how much of that do you hear about in one law, one Torah sectors, by extension, sectors identifying as pronomian? You probably hear the pronunciation pronomian, but I use pronomian because Bill Patrick in our Greek classes said it was nomos with a short O sound. You certainly don't hear about it in Hebrew roots. And that is something which is very important, which we all have to take into consideration. All right, so our theology roundup, I wanted to cover those points because I'm now going to be moving over to the Messianic Apologetics second statement. And we've referred to the second statement before. We have, of course, our statement of faith, which deals with the absolute core essentials of faith, the Bible, Yeshua, salvation, etc. And then we have the second statement. And the second statement deals more with other matters, like, where do you all stand regarding the one law, one Torah matter? And we're going to cover this before we get into the theology, the different Torah passages which use one law or one statute over the next several weeks. I'm not certain how many parts this is going to be in, but it's going to be at least as long as what we just went through with the Romans 9, 10, and 11 study. All right, so if you will go with me to the Messianic Apologetics website again, messianicapologetics.net. Here you see the tab Statement of Faith, and immediately underneath it, Second Statement. You can click on that, and we're going to scroll down to one law or one Torah theology. And this is where our ministry stands today in the year 2026 regarding this matter. And before I get into this, I would like to stress that, all of us, especially in the past decade, the past 15 to 16 years, all of us, those who are in favor of one law, one Torah theology, those who are negatively inclined, those who think that there's probably some third elusive solution to this, all of us have gone through various theological and spiritual changes. Some of these theological and spiritual changes are the result of, guess what? Bad behavior and attitudes we have seen by various groups. Likewise, some of these theological and spiritual changes have occurred as we've done more study and as we have had to, if necessary, tweak a few things in our theology here or our theology there. And just because someone might be negatively inclined toward identifying with a one law or one Torah theology does not all of a sudden mean, even though there are people who they want to see many non-Jewish believers leave the Messianic community, stop doing things like Shabbat and the festivals. If you don't identify as one law or one Torah, it does not automatically mean you want to see all the non-Jewish believers leave. It might just mean you have a different approach to these Torah passages, and instead you see various prophecies occurring in our midst today, like Micah 4, 1 through 3, Isaiah 2, 2 through 4, the nations streaming to Zion in the end times to be instructed in Moses' teaching. You see Acts 15, 15, the words of the prophets agree. And then 15, 16 through 18, that's Amos 9, 11 to 12, the restoration of the tabernacle of David in process. You see things that are anticipated in the prophets of Israel involving the nations and God's Torah taking place. And you're like, hey, as long as it's a genuine work of the Holy Spirit and these people are doing things like Shabbat or the festivals as a work of the Holy Spirit, as the Lord sanctifies them and sanctifies us all, and it's not a legalistic work of the flesh, great. And they're joining with us in common cause in the salvation of Israel. That's not really the one law, one Torah sub-movement. I've had too many experiences over the past 15 to 16 years with them to know that it's much more of a legalistic work of the flesh, no real emphasis on the Holy Spirit. And we've had some incidents with them over the past, 15 or 16 years. I don't tend to share them with people because I believe in focusing on commonality first, common beliefs first. But my relationships with a number of, one law people out there, I'm not going to mention any names, have been strained. They haven't been very easy because of, really, is it a work of the Holy Spirit? You being sanctified? And by the way, the foremost of the Torah's commandments are love for God and neighbor, or is it a work of the flesh, legalistic, inflexible, and certainly not interested in matters of Jewish outreach or evangelism? All right, to the Messianic Apologetics second statement. And we're basically going to state where we stand regarding the whole one law, one Torah issue before we get into some of its specifics. So there's no ambiguity here. Okay. One law or one Torah theology is considered to be a false teaching by the Messianic Jewish community. For certain, when it is exegetically evaluated, one law or one Torah theology is a product of a fundamentalist hermeneutic, meaning that people have made this a little too simplistic. It is correct that there are statements appearing within the jurisprudence of the Pentateuch. Pentateuch is the first 5 books of Moses, which detail one law or one statute applying to the native-born and sojourner in some way. Passages such as Exodus 12, 48 and 49, Leviticus 24, 22, Numbers 9, 14, 15, 15, and 16. Those of the one law or one Torah sub-movement incorrectly conclude that statements involving one law or one statute concern a universal Torah observance. When reviewed in their proper and wider context, Pentateuchal statements involving one law or one statute concern specific areas where a sojourner who had entered into ancient Israel could have been treated unfairly or taken advantage of, unlike a native. They did not speak of universal Torah, but instead concerned specific targeted matters. And that's where we're going to be investigating a lot over the next few weeks or the next few sessions. One law, one Torah theology is frequently criticized because it tends to conclude that there were virtually no differences of any kind between the native and sojourner in ancient Israel. When pointed out, various differences which did exist between native and sojourner in the Torah are not handled too well by most supporters of a one law or one Torah theology. An obvious issue would involve how only the physical descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob have an ancestral claim to tribal territories in the land of Israel. Sojourners who entered in from the outside to the community of Israel could not make such claims. Over the years, our family and ministry have had very poor and often very strained relations with many persons, listen carefully please, stridently identifying as one law or one Torah. In our experience, the one law, one Torah sub-movement is marked by a great deal of legalism, inflexibility, and judgmentalism. It is our opinion, but just the same, it is widely devoid of the work of the Holy Spirit and absent of a great deal of the required love and grace of true Messiah followers. Some proponents are known to hold to unsustainable ideas such as the New Covenant, Jeremiah 31, 31 to 34, Ezekiel 36, 25 to 27, also Hebrews 8, 7 to 13, actually having been operative in the pre-resurrection era, prior to Yeshua's work on the tree of sacrifice, Luke 22, verse 20. One law or one Torah theology is also widely seen to conclude that there have been no major changes of any kind naturally resultant from the Messiah event. This can most especially involve its sway toward theonomy, quite contrary to how the capital penalties of the Torah were absorbed in the death of Yeshua, Colossians 2:14, with capital punishment largely being a thing of the past. And I'm only going to say this once, so listen up very carefully. It was over the issue of theonomy back in, this would now have been spring of the year 2010, so 16 years ago, why I had a falling out with Tim Hegg of Torah Resource. He believed that capital punishment was still operative for today, including sexual sins. That's why in 1 Corinthians, I asked the question, well, obviously we live in a new post-resurrection reality where Yeshua absorbed that penalty onto himself, because in 1 Corinthians, the sexual sinner was given expulsion. And he said, no, the reason he was given expulsion is because the Jewish community didn't have the ability to execute him, and the Messianic community couldn't do anything about it. So that's as far as they could go. And I said, no, I disagree. Yeshua took that penalty onto himself. So now we live in the post-resurrection era, new realities. We don't execute sinners when they commit some of these things, because Yeshua took our penalty onto himself. And I realized at that point, in my experience, there was something supernaturally, spiritually wrong with a lot of this whole one law, one Torah thing. Because if they could today, I do believe many of them would see that different crimes where there's capital punishment prescribed in the Torah, they would see sinners executed. Whereas no, Yeshua took that onto himself. So no, I'm not a supporter of theonomy. Okay, continuing. Pronomian Christianity, or you are more likely to hear the pronunciation pronomian Christianity, is a widely associated venue or extension of one law or one Torah theology. There are some sincere people involved with pronomian Christianity who certainly desire to return to a theological foundation in Moses' teaching. But the emerging pronomian movement also has some voices who bear distinct tinges of replacement theology, i.e., the church is Israel. Today in the body of Messiah, do Jewish and non-Jewish believers have the exact same relationship to the Torah? No. The Torah of Moses composes the ethnic and cultural heritage of today's Jewish people. I mean, to me, that's beyond dispute. It may only be considered part of the spiritual heritage of non-Jewish believers in Israel's Messiah, who themselves will have another ethnic background and history as part of their identity. The Jewish people have a unique, direct connection to the Torah. Non-Jewish believers only have an indirect, spiritual connection. So, for example, yes, I consider the first 5 books of Moses to be part of my spiritual heritage. It's part of the spiritual heritage of all of us. Yet, I am also a Scottish American. That is an ethnic background, a history, a culture which directly affects me. It directly affects my value system, how I look at the world, and how I reason through issues. It's also one of the main reasons why I tend to look at things in a third or fourth way many others can't consider, right? You know, a deep part of my own background is formulating those solutions, formulating those options other people haven't considered. And in the process, hopefully calming everyone down and reminding us what our, made purpose is as the people of God. Now, we're going to finish up. We got 2 paragraphs left. It needs to be recognized how being disfavorable to one law or one Torah theology, its fundamentalism and its legalism, listen very carefully, please, does not automatically mean that a person or ministry is seen to actively discourage non-Jewish believers from partaking of God's blessings in outward Torah practices, such as the seventh-day Sabbath, Shabbat, festivals or Moedim, or a kosher style of diet. There are plenty of Messianic Jewish believers who are very gratified when non-Jewish people come into the Messianic community, they partake of these things as they grow in faith, as they grow in holiness, but most especially as it then transitions to them co-laboring with Jewish believers in the restoration of Israel, the salvation of the Jewish people. Okay, so this idea that Messianic Judaism as a whole is discouraging non-Jewish believers from partaking of these things is wrong. Unfortunately, a lot on the bilateral ecclesiology, distinction theology side are seen more to discourage than say, hey, what is the Lord doing in your life? And is he prompting you to consider these things? If we did that, I think that we'd be in a much, if we saw more of that or heard more of that, we'd be in a much different Messianic community. Now, please, the Torah itself emphasized a universal education of all within the community of ancient Israel, Deuteronomy 31:12. While there were various differences between native and sojourner in ancient Israel, now please listen to this. If you don't listen to anything else, listen to this. Native and sojourner also had far more in common than not. Let me read that again. Native and sojourner also had far more in common than not. And look, I'm going to be really candid with you. Among far too much of the Messianic community, the Messianic sphere of influence, yes, and this includes one law, one Torah too. Guess what? Most people focus on differences first and not common faith first. It starts where we disagree, not where we agree. And the religious culture, which focuses on differences first rather than our common faith in the Lord first, that is not necessarily a religious culture which sees kingdom work easily accomplished. Okay? So, when I said this morning, when I posted this morning, we need to get beyond some of the emotionalism, some of the dogma. Mistakes have been made by everyone on all sides. This is the major mistake. Focusing on differences first. And look, we're not all exactly the same. Failing to focus on common faith first. That has been the number one problem our family has had with the Messianic community since we entered into it 1995, 1996. And I don't know if it's ever going to be resolved. I do believe that there are many people who absolutely agree. Yes, common faith first, and then it doesn't register. Other people, common faith first, and they're doing their best to see it implemented. It may not be easily implemented until more difficulty comes to us. And guess what? We've got difficulty. We're going to get into the news roundup in a moment. We've got difficulty on our back door. Many thousands of non-Jewish believers, by the prompting of the Holy Spirit and the power of the new covenant, uniquely writing commandments onto their heart and mind, have been called, or we may better say summoned in some cases, by the Lord into the Messianic movement in this hour. They have partaken of their faith heritage in Israel's scriptures in tangible ways. But unlike many in the one law or one Torah sub-movement, are also actively involved in the Messianic Jewish mission, especially Jewish outreach and evangelism. Yeah, like my stepfather, Mark Huey, he works for the Joseph Project, which sends humanitarian aid to Israel. That's a big, huge part of the Messianic Jewish mission because it helps the Messianic Jewish community get credibility with the government of Israel, with different NGOs in Israel, different municipalities in Israel. And they see that, look, the Messianic Jewish community, yeah, they believe in Jesus, but they just want to bless us, and they are our brothers and sisters. So yeah, and that's something very, very important for Jewish outreach and evangelism. Ministering with your hands, being the hands and the feet of Yeshua, because all the more traditional or customary methods of evangelism, particularly as seen through a lot of church history, they don't work. And in this day and age, what the Jewish community wants to see is, are you going to stand with us against the tide of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism? Okay. It is to be fairly recognized that while there were specific contexts in the Pentateuch involving one law or one statute, that, contrary to the conclusion of a number of persons in Messianic Judaism, although it's not universal, such a one law or one statute adhered to in specific areas highlighted commonality and fairness, and not differences or distinctions as being the most important focus of the Torah's jurisprudence. The Torah given to ancient Israel, given to the community of ancient Israel, did not teach absolute 100% sameness between the native and sojourner, but it did teach commonality between the native and sojourner. And that commonality is not often emphasized in some Messianic Jewish arenas. That's why you will see a lot of non-Jewish people, particularly those from more mainstream Protestant backgrounds, they'll come into the Messianic community and they'll, go through a year of Torah study or something. They'll participate in congregational Shabbat, congregational festivals, and then someone will overstate, well, the uniqueness of the Jewish people. They'll overstate it. And then they'll say, hey, I support Israel, I support the Jewish people, but I just can't see myself being in a faith community which overemphasizes differences and doesn't focus on common faith enough. There are definitely Messianic congregations, Messianic synagogues, which emphasize common faith. Hey, we're not all the same, but we're brothers and sisters, one new man, one new humanity. And for non-Jewish believers doing outward things of Torah, if it's the work of the Holy Spirit, if they're growing in faith, growing in sanctification, and they're participating in the Messianic mission, we're fine with that. But what does one law or one Torah focus on? And how much Torah-olatry is there that they don't try to prevent? I mean, my experience, at least, has not always been that positive. And look, I encourage all believers to consider our family story, getting led into the Messianic community a little over 30 years ago. It has not always been easy. At times, we've taken those third and fourth opinions, third and fourth positions many have not considered. And yeah, I think if they had considered them, we'd be in a much better position right now in some areas. So over the next several weeks, I'm not sure how many parts this is going to be. We're going to review what this whole one law, one Torah controversy is. We're going to be reviewing the specific passages where one law or one statute is used in some context, not what a meme you've seen online says, but what does it mean in context? What have different examiners said? Jews, Christians, conservatives, liberals. And how are we to come to a better handle on this in our increasingly changing times? And indeed, what I've discovered is everyone, regardless of what side of the debate you find yourself, is going to have to make a concession they're not willing to make. I've had to make various concessions. I've had to recalibrate some things. I've had to say, hey, I don't think that I was taught this passage was interpreted the right way. Everyone's going to have to make a concession that they've overstated things, that they've pushed dogma, not doctrine, and that they have not focused on common elements of faith first. They focused on human differences first. So I hope you will be joining with us in the next few weeks. It's going to be challenging. This has been long requested, and hopefully we can come to some preliminary resolution. All right, so That finishes up the theology roundup. Let's now move on to the news roundup. We do the news roundup after the theology roundup because the news is, of course, time sensitive and it changes from day to day. We are reminded to, number one, be praying for peace, Israel, Gaza, the Middle East, the Iranian situation, of course. Number two, be praying for peace, Russia and Ukraine. And number three, be praying for reason and sanity to prevail here on the American home front, the Western Hemisphere. We've got things like the Epstein files being released. And yeah, we've got growing anti-Semitism and growing anti-Zionism, and we should be very concerned about world events and how they affect today's Messianic community. And we've got a selection of stories ranging from theology, Israel, what's happening in the United States, and yeah, we really do need to be on guard and paying attention and appealing to the Lord for his supernatural protection and perseverance right now. Okay, all the stories I'm about to go through, these will be listed on the Messianic Apologetics website later today when this episode is archived. So you can go in and look at the articles in their entirety, watch the different clips, etc. All right, our first story, and this concerns Kirk Cameron. Kirk Cameron's been getting a lot of controversy recently, especially for his new position on eternal punishment, favoring the annihilationist view. But here, there's an interview with Kirk Cameron. This is a 2-minute, 15-second clip. Kirk Cameron on why he left behind. And for the most part, Kirk Cameron has shifted from a dispensational premillennial point of view, believing in an imminent pre-trib rapture to heaven, to now widely ascribing to some kind of a post-millennial or amillennial interpretation regarding the end times. Now, he is, of course, free to change theological positions if he sees that the biblical evidence in his mind points in a different direction. But here, the main reason why he has been seen to change some of the position on the end times is the interviewer here, Kylie Griswold. There are things that matter so much more than our eschatology, but foreign policy flare-ups bring it into sharper focus, like when our foreign policy toward Israel is shaped by our views of dispensationalism. So, did Kirk Cameron change end time positions because of U.S. foreign policy toward the state of Israel? So there's another article which goes into greater detail about this. This is from the Post Millennial, February the 6th. The headline is, Kirk Cameron says he's left behind Christian Rapture film series Left Behind. I can tell you that the more I've studied church history, the more that I've studied the scriptures. It's pretty safe to say that I've left behind. So you can read this article in its entirety, but here you definitely see that. Okay, this is the last paragraph here. Israel is in all the news. Israel, you know, is involved in wars, and the United States politically is tied in and militarily and financially. And so you go, wow, could this actually result in people going to war, the Left Behind movies or not? And it's very interesting if you really do a deep dive into it. It's not conspiracy 10, tin foil hat stuff. This is like real, and it really does impact foreign policy. So you can see this in greater detail later. But U.S. foreign policy toward the state of Israel itself, which can be affected by the dispensational lobby, the dispensational bloc, appears to have affected Kirk Cameron's change in eschatology. And how does that affect today's Messianic community? We do have a lot of people in today's Messianic Jewish movement who actually do adhere to a dispensational pre-trib model of the end times. We've got a lot of them here in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. There are others who adhere to more of a modified historic premillennialism. So it's premillennial. Yeshua returns before the 1,000-year reign, but historic premillennialism was post-trib. So believers are going to go through the 70th week of Daniel. And I say modified because a lot of historic premillennialism was supersessionist or replacement theology. So if you look at some of the post-trib positions of whether you agree with them all on everything or not isn't the point, of a Dan Juster, for example, he would be someone who would adhere to a modified historic premillennial view. And generally speaking, I would adhere to a modified historic premillennial view. It's post-trib, but it is definitely focused on matters of Israel, the salvation of the Jewish people, and the return of Yeshua to Jerusalem to reign over a restored kingdom of Israel for 1,000 years. All right, to the Middle East situation. From The Economist, and you have to log in to read the whole article. This is from February the 6th. As America gears up for talks with Iran, which took place over the weekend, the prevailing view in Washington is that they will fail. The longer they drag on, the greater the expectations of a strike. Yes, and right now, that is kind of where we are. There were talks in Muscat, Oman, between the United States and Iran. We did report on Friday that they appeared to be indirect. So one group is in one room, another group is in another room, and they had Omani intermediaries. They apparently did meet face to face and talk about some of these matters, but it doesn't appear they're really going to go anywhere. Not a huge surprise. Although right now, you're going to hear differing reports from day to day. Okay. From the National Review, you're going to want to look through this. This is kind of be aware of this. This is from February the 5th. It came across my social media path. Another path forward for Christian Zionists. So this talked about a Christian Zionist function held recently. You can look through and see what the author of this article picked up. Yes, Christianity has its roots in Judaism, and it's that simple. Our Messiah is Jewish. Need to be aware of what's happening since October the 7th, 2023. But here, if you read through this article and you get a feel for what its author is trying to sort through, Yes, Haley Strack is the author. She comes to the basic conclusion that there was not a consistent, logical reason for supporting Israel, meaning the state of Israel, theologically. And indeed, one of the big things that today's Messianic community is going to have to sort through, and it's going to be easier for some people, it's going to be more difficult for others. Just like there are details to be sorted through with the different passages, one law, one statute, there was an original context, which strident one law supporters often do not consider. I will bless those who bless you, curse those who curse you. There was a specific context given to that. And then it was applied to the expanse of the good news or the gospel message in the first century, with the ultimate blessing being Yeshua, Jesus, the Messiah. And so a lot of people who are opposed to Christian Zionism, they say, that's ultimately a blessing about Jesus. It's not about blessing the Jewish people, and certainly not the state of Israel today. There are many other passages, of course, within the Tanakh, within the Old Testament, which speak about God's immutable promises to the ethnic descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, whether it's the promised land, the land of Canaan, right, given to them in perpetuity, whether it is the promise of the Davidic throne, whether it's promises of the city of Jerusalem. They can't all be abstracted as just, ethereal symbols of the kingdom of God. No, it concerns an actual land. It concerns an actual throne of David. concerns a return of physical people to the promised land in the end times. We're going to have to get up on our game as the Messianic community and move beyond some of just the simplistic, I'll bless those who bless you, curse those who curse you. We've got to get more into detail regarding, how do you look at a nation born in a day in Isaiah 66:8? And to be honest, this concerns more at this point. It concerns more with people in our own Messianic sphere of influence and different Christian people who are within our sphere of influence. Trying to change the views of a hardcore supersessionist, they're long gone. They're too far gone. Instead, what are you doing to people who come into the Messianic community from evangelical backgrounds? And would Messianic Jews say non-Jews have to be specially called or summoned by the Lord into this movement? This is one of the reasons why. Even at my own local congregation, I have seen since October the 7th, different people, non-Jewish believers, leave. And why is that the case? Is it we're not talking about, and I don't know, but is it possible that we're not talking about these contemporary matters enough and they were convinced that, well, maybe the supersessionist case is right? I don't know. But if we don't talk about some of these matters, are we going to lose people? Now, people who are genuinely called, summoned by the Lord, when they need an answer to something, they're going to find it. But indeed, there are a lot of matters involving Israel, Judaism, Zionism, the state of Israel, we got to discuss. And some people are looking for a simplistic case. We can't do that. Okay, from speaking of rising anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, Calvin Robinson. Calvin Robinson, where does the Star of David come from? And here he talks about it's basically linked to the worship of Remphan and the tabernacle of Moloch. And of course, many of you all have seen this before. And you took up the tent of Moloch and the star of the god Remphan. So he's basically saying that the Star of David is a occultic. He'd probably go as far, many others would say it's just blatantly satanic, and it proves that God is finished with the Jewish people. Now, we don't hear a lot of discussions about this in today's Messianic Jewish community, which is surprising considering the fact that a post like that can just go viral all over social media. One of the things which needs to be stressed, you go back to ancient times, you're going to see all kinds of geometric symbols, circles, squares, 5-pointed stars, 6-pointed stars, etc., decorate different religious temples, different places of religious gathering. And yes, it even included ancient synagogues. You can go to Israel today, see the ruins of ancient synagogues, and you can see 6-pointed stars. You can see other different geometric symbols as well. There is little doubting when you do a little bit of investigation in comparative religion that various occultic activities have occurred using a 6-pointed star, using a 5-pointed star, using a circle, using a square, using various alphabets, be those alphabets Egyptian. Well, Egypt really didn't have an alphabet. Egyptian hieroglyphics didn't have an alphabet as we understand it. Be it the Phoenician alphabet used by ancient Israel in terms of the Paleo-Hebrew script, the Block Hebrew script, the Greek alphabet, the Roman alphabet. I mean, all kinds of symbols have been used for all kinds of dastardly deeds. And so on one level, recognizing that a 6-pointed star has been used in occultic activity, okay, we can't deny that. Now, when the ancient Israelites were criticized for adhering to the Star of Remphan or something, that was not a symbol. That was an astrological phenomenon, often associated with the planet Saturn. Go look it up, and a resource like the behind me, actually, it's behind my head, but I remember when I wrote on this a number of years ago, a resource like the Interpreter's Dictionary of the Bible. it's associated with the planet Saturn. It's not necessarily a geometric symbol. That's what that star is. But people who go after the Star of David, for example, they say, oh, it's a pagan occultic symbol, blah, 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 blah. They will often never be balanced in their criticism and recognize that a symbol like a T, i.e., the cross, guess what? That's been used in all kinds of occultic activities as well. Symbol of a cross, whether it's a T, you know, a cross T, or like what we consider a capital T, an X. Likewise, they've all been used in occultic activities, and you often don't see that kind of balance, and that is unfortunate, because then, of course, we couldn't use any, with the Star of David, a cross, different kinds of candelabras, menorahs. We couldn't use anything. But Calvin Robinson is a troublemaker. He gets a lot of people stirred up. He definitely has sided with those who oppose Judeo-Christian heritage. It's just Christian heritage. The church is the new Israel, and he believes that the Jews are just as guilty as the Muslims are for all of the world's problems. So be aware of Calvin Robinson. And yes, he's definitely associated with a lot of Christian nationalist stuff here in America, although he is Anglican and he is from England. All right. Our next story, this is something we really need to be considering right now as Messianic people, from the Jerusalem Post. Is Israel prepared for the anti-Semitic fallout of a U.S.-Iran war? Opinion. A geopolitical earthquake abroad could trigger a social and political anti-Semitic tsunami at home. So you can, look through this, and yeah, there are a lot of people who are recognizing right now, what if there's a conflict between the U.S. and Iran? Of course, Israel's most likely to get involved. What's going to happen? And they're comparing this possibility to what took place post October the 7th, 2023, which we're still trying to sort through. And a lot of people in the Messianic community, and I mean this with all the love and respect in the world, still have not adequately sorted through. There were a lot of people who initially, October the 7th took place, or all those hostages taken away by Hamas. And then after that, they were like, okay, send in your special forces, go get the hostages back, bless those who bless you, and I'm with you. And then they saw this long series of, strong war in Gaza, the IDF bombing all these buildings, taking out terrorist units, taking out terrorist tunnels, and then they seeing what many in the media were depicting as an overreaction on the part of the state of Israel. And then many on the left, at first, well, Israel's committing genocide against the Palestinians. They began to think, why am I supporting Israel? A lot of us, we don't know the long-term impact of that. And that's all, of course, over social media. And the Jewish community wasn't prepared. The state of Israel wasn't prepared. The state of Israel largely lost the PR campaign on social media. And the Messianic Jewish community, I mean this with a lot of love and respect, and maybe it's just my experience, did not discuss this as frequently as it should have. But here, at least we see an op-ed piece that what's going to happen as a result of a U.S.-Iran war. What could happen? Now, we don't know yet what's going to happen, but we just need to be factoring that in. Okay, as it involves the PR war, this was an interesting article. This is from the New York Post from February the 7th. So this was on Saturday. Gen Z, the first generation officially dubbed dumber than the last. Okay, so this is a really good read. You can review this, but mainly, here you can see a picture of someone with an iPhone. Constant screen time has not been beneficial for Gen Z, experts said. Yeah, how many people in Gen Z, first of all, how many of them don't know how to do basic things like, I don't know, write with a pen, pencil, and paper? How many of them don't know how to cook food? They go to, McDonald's, they get fast food too much. They don't know how to make a cup of coffee because they go to Starbucks. They don't know how to do basic things. They don't know how to, uh, they wouldn't know how to use a yellow pages, but they don't know how to do some of the tactile things those of us from the older generations know how to do. I mean, I grew up 1980s, 1990s with the yellow pages, with rotary phones, but also with, the PC with the 5.25 inch and then later 3.5 inch. And we were here for technology, but we don't let technology control us. And unfortunately, too many people are using these devices too much to the point where their reasoning skills are not as strong as they should be. And now, of course, we live in the age of things like AI, Chat GPT, Grok. I don't know. I don't use those tools. I'm still using search engines, and it affects not only how they look at the world, but it affects how they're going to look at spirituality. So, yeah, Gen Z dumber than millennials. Okay, I'm going to briefly mention this because on Friday we mentioned what R.L. Solberg did with the biblical roots. He did a follow up response to what he posted, where the headline is "Disagreement Isn't Persecution: A Biblical Response to the Backlash," because a lot of people interpreted his post that he is putting together some kind of database or map of different Hebrew roots, Torah keeping groups. Um, and he recognized that some of the statements that were posted could be interpreted incorrectly. For his purposes, he is concerned about different mainstream churches where, hard and fast, militant Hebrew roots Torah keepers, they go in there and they try to change everything. They try to, put yokes of guilt, yokes of burden on people. You're all in sin. You're all damned because you're not keeping the Sabbath or you're eating pork or something. He did clarify he's not against non-Jewish believers doing things, outward things of Torah, provided they're not trying to put it on somebody else. Uh, to which I would say, look, it's an individual's response to the prompting of the Holy Spirit. We've always said it's between you and the Lord. Let us tell you what our story is. But still, there are concerns about what Solberg is going to do. If you're in a Messianic Jewish congregation, especially if you're in a UMJC or IMCS congregation, it's probably not going to affect you as immediately as it's going to affect a lot of independent types of groups. But we'll see what happens. I don't trust the man, but that's me. Okay, here is an important article from the Times of Israel from February the 9th. I'm sorry, February the 7th. So this is on Saturday. U.S. Jewish organizations are reassessing allies after October the 7th betrayals, key Jewish leader says. So you can read this article in its entirety, but the main thing is scroll down just a little bit. Okay. For years, mainstream Jewish organizations have invested heavily in community relations work, building ties with African American, Latino, LGBT groups, and labor unions, among others. They joined coalitions on issues such as raising the minimum wage, civil rights, and broader social justice agendas. Part of the purpose was basic decency, but there was also a strategic aspect, an expectation that when Jews faced rising anti Semitism or when Israel was under attack, those allies would stand with them. So, a lot of this article goes into how, when October the 7th took place, the Jewish community in America, which was allied to some of these, left of center leftist groups, expected these same groups to stand with them, and they didn't. And of course, as you see the Jewish community being turned on by many of its customary progressive allies and friends, what's the answer going to be? Well, hopefully, it's going to be there's only one person we can actually turn to for help, and that's God. And the answer God is going to provide is Yeshua, the Messiah of Israel. Okay, this is a really sad story, but there was a request to make it go viral, to share it. From 2CTV, February the 8th, yesterday, anti-Islamic occupation Iranian Poria Hamidi took his own life after making this video asking President Trump to not make a deal with the Islamic Republic. He was young, and his message must get to the world leaders, including the White House. Please share Free Iran. Now, from the very beginning, and there's a 2-minute, 10-second clip here. This was apparently released, after he committed suicide. From the very beginning, we have been praying for the people of Iran. We've been praying that they have the ability to rise up and see the Islamic Republic come to an end. Because, that's what Iran was, a much more free, open society before the overthrow of the Shah in 1979. But it would also, we see a different Middle East. Yes, we'd be seeing prophecy likely take place, some period of peace and safety. But this is just very, very sad. And while I grieve that someone thought there was nothing else to do than to commit suicide, there's also an element of this. You're fighting for a free Iran, and yet you have just removed yourself from the fight. A coward commits suicide. A coward kills himself or herself. Regardless of what fight we're in, nothing is so bad so as to have to take your own life. Okay, February the 8th. This is just kind of a news story. This is from Visegrad 24. Japanese Prime Minister Takaichi secures supermajority in the lower house, winning at least 316 seats of 465, well above the 2/3 threshold needed. And you can read all this in its entirety, but it concludes with Takaichi's massive win today puts Japan on a path of transforming its military into a force capable of defending itself from Chinese aggression and threats. So that's kind of interesting, because we know that one of the hot areas is, of course, South Asia, Southeast Asia, China, Taiwan. Japan has kind of been withheld from what it can do militarily since the end of the Second World War, but Japan is a strong Western American ally. And how is this going to affect U.S.-Chinese relations? What China is going to do, what it's not going to do, Taiwan. It's important to keep that in mind. So that's, but yeah, the impressive victory on the part of the Japanese Prime Minister. Okay, yesterday, February the 8th, from C14 News Israel, there's a 54-second clip here. Exclusive. Qatar will definitely have a new regime. It's not today, but it's very soon. Khalid al-Hayal, the leader of the Qatari opposition, tells Lital Shemesh Israel debrief about his plans for Israel after the Qatari regime falls, and a revelation about Somaliland. So I know right now we see a lot of emphasis on, Qatar. They sponsor groups which are not conducive to peace. Are they funding Tucker Carlson? But there is a Qatari opposition which is in favor of good relations with the state of Israel. They're in favor of the Abraham Accords. There's no uniformity in any of these places. So I thought that was important to pass along. Okay, open source intel. Yesterday, 12:04 p.m., there's a 40-second clip. Iran's foreign minister Agrachi says Tehran does not trust Washington and is wary of potential U.S. deception. Of course, there's meetings over the weekend in Oman, and yeah, how far are they going to go? Probably not that far. Okay, here is an interesting story. This is from Visegrad 24. This kind of shows you where a lot of things are right now. This was posted yesterday, 3:16 p.m. A second top-level diplomat of the Islamic regime in Europe just defected. Iran's chargé d'affaires in Vienna has jumped ship, and he's applied for. Okay, so he's following the example of someone else who applied for asylum in Switzerland. And along with that, as you see a number of different diplomatic members of the Islamic Republic say, hey, I need asylum here. In this case, it's in Austria. What does that signal for the current status of the Islamic Republic? There was an interview with Scott Bessent, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, at the end of last week. I did not. Anyway, talking about how there are all these wire transfers right now being monitored outside of Iran because its leaders, many of its leaders, are preparing to leave. So, the Iranian situation is ongoing and it creates a huge amount of tension. Okay, we got 7 more stories to go through. I'll try to make this quick. From Iran International English, 8th of February, Iranians plead with Trump not to negotiate with Islamic Republic. Now, we don't fully know how Trump is doing things. We're not going to know. There are 2 schools of thought on this. One school of thought is that he's going to come to some kind of an arrangement with the Islamic Republic. Others, this is just stalling for time. Trump, the United States, they're getting their military assets in order. Do they have enough military assets in place, or are they also expecting Israel, other allies to be involved? We're not going to know until it happens. So we just continue to wait. And one of the things I would stress, and I had a conversation with my sister about this last night, so many people on social media, so many influencers, they think they understand how governments and the military work, and they don't, because we will not be told as the general population a majority of what is happening. We just won't. And yes, we can speculate, we can guess. We're not going to know everything until everything is finally over. And even then, there are going to be things withheld from us. Okay, from 2CTV, February the 8th, 4:13 p.m., so yesterday, breaking, Khamenei declares IRGC ready to attack Israel, Iran in state of war. So you can watch some of this, and 2C's got a lot of good opinions about what could be taking place right now. Likewise, from Reuters yesterday, 12:30 p.m., Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi says there was no other option but to negotiate, referring to nuclear talks with the U.S. And there's a 2-minute, 5-second clip here. But we know the situation goes day to day, and our negotiations just a ploy to buy time, whether it's the U.S. getting its assets in place, the Iranian regime bolting because they're like rats on a sinking ship. We don't know fully. But what we do know is we have a responsibility as believers to know what's going on. Pray for the believers in Iran. Pray for the Messianic Jews in Israel. Pray for everyone for this to be resolved quickly and decisively. Okay, from I-24 News English. This is from yesterday, 5:19 p.m., and there's a 2-minute, 7-second clip. The Iranian regime is willing to use maximum force with little concern for casualties in order to maintain its grip on power. So, yeah, the situation continues to build. And what's going to happen? The Iranian regime does have blood on its hands with murdering many of those who have risen up against it, many of those who have protested. And now we just wait to see what Israel and the U.S. are going to do or not do. So with that in mind, this was reposted from Open Source Intel Defender, 1-minute, 40-second clip. Video reposted earlier today on TikTok. It was posted yesterday, 8:13 p.m., by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu describing potential strikes by the U.S. Navy against Iran. Now, one of the things which is interesting about, and I'm speculating now, just to be clear, when you see Prime Minister Netanyahu posting this kind of a video, this could be how a conflict against Iran goes. If there is a conflict against Iran with U.S. Naval forces in the region, is that how it's going to go? Or could it go completely different? I mean, you have to begin to think in those kinds of terms when you see something like this. Watching that little clip, yes, that is the way things could happen, but is it the way things are going to happen? Okay, two more stories. This is from Open Source Intel, a number of paragraphs posted this morning at 2:39 a.m., February 9th. The Jerusalem Post reports that Israeli defense officials have warned U.S. counterparts that Iran's ballistic missile program now constitutes an existential threat to Israel and could trigger unilateral Israeli military action. Okay, so yeah, I mean, one scenario is that the United States, yes, it's built up this huge armada in the region, naval armada, but Israel sees what Iran is doing as a threat, and it just goes in. And then what's the U.S. going to do? What are the other Gulf powers, allies? What are they going to do? That is one potential scenario, but things change day to day. Okay, and then finally, and this is something we're going to be, of course, monitoring this week. Open source intel, 8:39 a.m. Although this was announced yesterday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is scheduled to travel to Washington tomorrow for talks with President Trump, returning to Israel early Friday. So Netanyahu is going to be coming to Washington. He's going to be having talks with Trump, probably others in the Department of War, the Department of State, etc. And what's going to come of that? The situation is very tense over in the Middle East. Many of us remember what we witnessed last year with the buildup to the 12-day war. I would suspect, and this is my opinion, you're not going to see the same series of events happen with a potential second conflict. It will be different because those are the factors which a government like Iran is, well, they did this last time. What are they going to do this time? I would expect something very different, but we go day to day. We continue to pray for peace, pray for reason and sanity to prevail, and pay attention. And I think the best story, well, the most important story from today is from the Jerusalem Post. What kind of anti-Semitic fallout could there be in the world from a U.S.-Iran, obviously Israel will be involved, conflict? We're still trying to sort through October the 7th, 2023. All right, and that concludes our news roundup. Tomorrow, we'll begin more the formal study of the whole one law, one Torah issue. Please do stick with us in this study. I know that this is an issue which gets a lot of people tense, anxious, upset. We're going to be going to the text of the Holy Scriptures where ultimate authority rests. But we're not going to go to the text in a simplistic way. And we are going to be focusing on common elements of faith first. And simply because one may be disfavorable to a one law or one Torah theology does not mean that they are discouraging non-Jewish believers from participating in things like the Sabbath or festivals or kosher eating. But we do need to participate in the Messianic mission, Jewish outreach, evangelism, Israel solidarity, standing against anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, that much more. As always, on behalf of Messianic Apologetics, I would like to sincerely thank you for your ongoing prayers, encouragement, and support for all of our ministry efforts. Please consider signing up for a monthly $25 or $50 donation. Your support of our ministry efforts goes a long way, especially with all of the unforeseen things, the nuts and bolts of being in ministry. If you haven't, please do visit my website, messianicapologetics.net, where you can access a wide array of articles, frequently asked questions entries, different back issues of Outreach Israel News, different back episodes of Messianic Insider, McKee Moment Shorts, and generally you can take a look at our ministry adventures from over the years. And please be sure to give this episode a thumbs up or a heart. It'll definitely help our exposure on social media. We will see you tomorrow with another episode of Messianic Insider. Until then, may God bless you. Shalom, and take care.